You stepped on my dress, Rachel the tourist shrieked, her voice harsh enough to make the entire restaurant turn in her direction. The laughter from other tables quieted. I am so sorry, Jessica the waitress stammered, instinctively reaching out to apologize, but Rachel was not having it. This dress could buy your future, Rachel sneered, standing up, the anger radiating off her. She looked down at Jessica with a contemptuous smirk. What are you even doing here, working for tips like some lowly servant? You do not deserve to even be in this place. Before anyone could blink, the loud noise of the slap echoed through the air. What happened next is unbelievable as we dive into the story. If you believe everyone should be treated with respect, then tell us in the comments where you are watching from and click the subscribe button now to enjoy this story. The restaurant was bustling as usual, the type of place where the city's elite came to dine, well-dressed businessmen, couples celebrating anniversaries, and tourists seeking a taste of luxury. The staff, a team of hard-working individuals, moved seamlessly between tables, their every action calculated to ensure the guest's experience was perfect. Jessica, the young black woman in her mid-20s, was part of that team. She had worked at this upscale restaurant for several months now, using every shift to save money for college. She was a hard worker, reliable and composed, with dreams of something bigger. She had big plans for her future, and this job, though demanding, was a stepping stone. For Jessica, the restaurant was just that, a place to work, earn and move forward. She had never felt out of place, but tonight that was about to change. Jessica was not just another waitress. She was proud of the work she did, knowing it was a part of her journey toward her future. She was the cousin of the restaurant owner, someone who had been raised with a sense of responsibility and dignity. But despite her inner strength, tonight she was about to face something she had not experienced before: blatant disrespect. Rachel's glare as Jessica approached her table was not subtle. There was no mistaking the way Rachel looked at her, like she was a servant who had crossed the line. Jessica felt it in the pit of her stomach, but she was not the type to back down. She kept her composure and smiled, moving forward with her usual professional ease. Rachel was everything Jessica was not: wealthy, entitled, and arrogantly unaware of how her actions affected others. She sat at the table with her friends, laughing, talking, and drinking wine. But when Jessica approached to serve her, Rachel's mood shifted. Rachel's eyes narrowed slightly and her tone changed. The polite request turned into something more cutting, something that made Jessica pause. There was a noticeable difference in the way Rachel treated her compared to the other staff. It was the first time Jessica was experiencing this level of open hostility just because of who she was. It was not subtle. It was there in Rachel's every word, her every glance, and Jessica for the first time felt it. Sitting at the table next to Rachel was Sean, another tourist who was not blind to what was happening. Sean was observant. He was not a part of Rachel's entitled world, but he understood people. When he saw how Rachel treated Jessica, it made him uncomfortable. He noticed the dismissive glances, the subtle comments at Jessica's work, and his gut told him it was not just about bad service. It was something deeper, something that Jessica could not ignore. When Rachel's behavior became more toxic, Sean could not stay silent. He tried to speak up. "Hey there, you do not need to treat her like that," Sean said, his voice low but firm. But Rachel, without missing a beat, shot back. "Mind your business. I will treat her however I like." A social media influencer watched with great curiosity. She always had her eyes scanning, ready for news she would use to feed her followers. Jessica reached Rachel's table, ready to place down their orders. Jessica set the drink down, her movements graceful, but Rachel's impatience was palpable. "You know, I have been sitting here for 20 minutes and you have hardly even looked at my table," Rachel snapped, her tone sharp, cutting through the air. "I am sorry for the delay, ma'am," Jessica replied, forcing a smile. "Why is she acting so rude?" Emily's son asked. Emily and her 2 kids were sitting at the rear end of the restaurant. They had come to have a nice family bonding time. "Mom, you said that is not the right way to treat people," her daughter replied with a curious gaze in her eyes. "I know, my darlings. Her attitude is really wrong," Emily replied with a look of bewilderment on her face. Rachel was not finished. "It is not about the delay, it is about your attitude. You do not seem to care about your job. How long have you been working here? 2 weeks. You should know how to serve by now," she sneered. The tension in the air was thick. Rachel, having already made her rude comments, was not satisfied. She had set her sights on Jessica, the young waitress, and it seemed nothing would make her stop. Every small mistake was an opportunity for Rachel to tear her down, and Jessica, though she held herself with grace and patience, could feel the weight of the insults starting to add up. Rachel looked at her drink, her fingers tapping the rim of the glass as if waiting for Jessica to make a misstep. "You know," Rachel began, her voice dripping with superiority, "it is not hard to get a drink right. You should really focus a little more." She glanced up at Jessica as if the words were casual, but the tone was sharp, biting. Jessica stayed silent, offering a quick apology, trying to stay professional, but her patience was quickly being tested. She knew that people like Rachel expected perfection, even when they were not giving any respect in return. Rachel was not finished. Of course, she continued her rude remarks at Jessica, pointing out every minor issue from the temperature of the wine to the speed of Jessica's movements. Each comment cut deeper, but Jessica, trying to keep her emotions in check, kept moving between tables. She was not going to let Rachel ruin her night, especially not when she was so close to her goal of saving for college. But fate had a way of making things inevitable. Jessica reached Rachel's table to clear away the empty glasses and plates, moving carefully to avoid any mishaps. But in her haste to make sure Rachel's table was properly cleaned, Jessica accidentally stepped on the hem of Rachel's expensive dress. The sound of fabric ripping underfoot echoed across the table, and Rachel's eyes shot up immediately, filled with fury. "You stepped on my dress," Rachel shrieked, her voice harsh enough to make the entire restaurant turn in her direction. The laughter from other tables quieted. I am so sorry," Jessica stammered, instinctively reaching out to apologize, but Rachel was not having it. She slapped her on the face, cursing under her breath. "This dress could buy your future," Rachel sneered, standing up, the anger radiating off her. She looked down at Jessica with a contemptuous smirk. "What are you even doing here, working for tips like some lowly servant? You do not deserve to even be in this place." The words stung, but Jessica was not one to let them break her. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves, but she could feel her hands shaking. The insult was not just about the dress, it was about who Rachel thought she was, and how little respect she had for the people serving her. At that moment, Jessica's patience snapped. The thought of holding her tongue suddenly did not feel like the right choice. She was not going to stand there and take this. Not anymore. Without thinking twice, Jessica lifted her hand and slapped Rachel back, hard across the face. The sound of the slap rang through the room, louder than the clinking of glasses, sharper than any voice. The restaurant, once filled with quiet murmurs, now fell into complete silence. Jessica stood still, her chest heaving with the adrenaline of the moment, while Rachel staggered back in shock, her hand flying to her cheek. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Rachel's eyes were wide, her face flushed with embarrassment and disbelief. The other patrons sat in stunned silence, unsure of what to do, but Jessica, calm and steady, looked Rachel straight in the eye and spoke the words that would forever change the course of the night. "I will not be treated that way. Not by anyone. Not even you," Jessica said, her voice unwavering. Each word filled with the strength of someone who had finally taken control of her narrative. "What would you do if you were Jessica? Would you stand up for yourself or walk away? Let us know in the comments below, and do not forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this." The room's tension hung in the air like smoke, and for a moment time seemed to stand still. But the silence was soon broken by Sean, the tourist sitting at the neighboring table. Sean, a man in his mid-30s, had been watching the exchange from the corner of his eye. He had noticed Rachel's rude behavior and confronted it, but she had shut him down. "Hey, you do not get to treat people like that," Sean said, his voice loud enough for Rachel to hear, but not aggressive. He stood up, his eyes narrowing as he faced Rachel. "She was just doing her job. You cannot just walk all over people because you think you are better than them. I do not understand why you slapped her. I am sure you were not expecting her to reciprocate. Not everyone can be controlled by the likes of you," he said. Rachel, her face still burning from the slap, shot Sean a glare. "Mind your business," she hissed, her voice cutting through the air. "You do not know anything about me." Sean's expression remained firm. "I know enough, and what I see is someone who is too used to getting everything handed to them and never having to face the consequences of their actions." Rachel took a deep breath, her pride refusing to let her back down. "Stay out of it, or I will have you kicked out of here too." She was rattled, but her arrogance still blazed. Sean simply shook his head, disappointed, and sat back down. He was not going to fight her. It was clear Rachel did not care to listen. Meanwhile, Kylie, sitting at another table, had been watching the scene unfold and had already reached for her phone. Her fingers flew across the screen as she tweeted about the event. "A tourist just slapped a waitress. This is the kind of behavior we should not tolerate. Rude tourists. Justice for Jessica." Kylie's tweet caught fire almost instantly. Within minutes it had been shared by dozens, then hundreds of people. Replies flooded in, many people expressing their shock and disgust at Rachel's actions. What started as a minor interaction was now a viral moment, and Jessica's story was spreading far and wide. Over at the rear table, Emily, a mother dining with her children who had been quietly observing the drama, looked with shock. She could see the confused look on her children's faces, who had felt uncomfortable with Rachel's behavior before and decided it was time for a lesson. Though she did not say anything directly to them, she just made a simple but important comment. "Sometimes people think they can treat others badly just because they can, but that is not right. And no matter who you are, you can always stand up for yourself. Always." Rachel, now livid, stormed into the restaurant's office, demanding to see the manager. Her voice was sharp, and her every step was fueled by frustration. Mr. Brownstone, the manager, a middle-aged man with a calm demeanor, stood up as soon as he saw her enter. He had seen many guests like Rachel before, guests who thought their money gave them the right to act however they wanted. I want to speak to the person in charge, Rachel snapped, her tone demanding. This restaurant's standards are a joke. You need to deal with the staff and how I was treated. Mr. Brownstone stood his ground, his expression neutral. He did not flinch. I am the manager here. Ma'am, how can I assist you? I want that girl fired, and I want her to pay for what she did, Rachel hissed, her face red with rage. She slapped me in front of all those people. Do you have any idea who I am? Mr. Brownstone nodded slowly. I am aware of the situation, ma'am, but I think you will find that Jessica, the waitress, has a connection to the restaurant that you might not know about. Rachel raised an eyebrow, her anger momentarily quelling in the face of curiosity. What are you talking about? Jessica, Mr. Brownstone said calmly, is the cousin of the owner of this restaurant, and not just this restaurant. She is involved in other businesses as well, a very successful family. Rachel froze, her mind racing as the truth began to sink in. She had thought Jessica was just a lowly waitress, someone she could treat however she pleased. But now everything was changing. Jessica was not just any employee, she was family too, someone powerful. What did you say? Rachel asked, her voice growing quieter, more dangerous. The owner is her cousin. Yes, ma'am, Mr. Brownstone replied, his tone firm but respectful. You will find that we take our staff and our guests' experiences seriously, and we stand by our people, especially someone like Jessica. She is not working here because she is from a poor family. She wants to take an independent step by paying her first college tuition. Rachel's face reddened even more, the realization dawning on her. She had just slapped the cousin of the restaurant's owner, and her actions were about to have consequences far beyond the slap itself. Knowing she could not have her fired, she walked angrily out of the manager's office, slamming the door. Angry, humiliated, and feeling defeated, Rachel turned on her heel out of the restaurant. She had not gotten her way, but she was not the type to back down. She would deal with Jessica. She would make sure Jessica paid for what happened. As she walked out of the restaurant, Rachel made a silent vow to herself. She would make Jessica's life miserable. She would take this to the courts and destroy her. After all, she was not just going to let a waitress get away with humiliating her in front of everyone. Jessica's calm, defiant words echoed in her mind. I will not be treated that way, not by anyone, not even you. Rachel's pride was wounded, but what hurt the most was the fact that she had been shown up, humiliated in a way she could not accept. As she left, her thoughts spun into a whirlwind of retaliation. She was not going to let Jessica get away with this. No, she would take action. She would make Jessica pay for what had happened, for daring to slap her in front of so many people. Her wealth and connections had always given her an advantage in life, and she was certain they would work in her favor now. Rachel knew exactly what to do. She decided to sue Jessica for harassment, claiming that Jessica had instigated the physical confrontation. She was going to play the victim, spin the narrative that Jessica had attacked her for no reason, and use her money and influence to push her story. She was not going to let some waitress stand in the way of her pride. Days later, the case went to court. Rachel had filed her lawsuit, claiming that Jessica had harassed her by slapping her for no reason. She painted herself as the victim. Poor Rachel, just a tourist enjoying a night out only to be attacked by a waitress with a bad attitude. But what Rachel did not know was that Sean's father, a respected judge known for his fairness and integrity, had been assigned to oversee her case. Rachel had no idea who Sean was, but Sean had quietly told his father everything that had happened that night. He had shared the details of the incident, told him about the situation in the restaurant, and described what Rachel had done. The father had heard it all. When Rachel entered the courtroom, her sense of superiority was still intact. She assumed her wealth and status would make the case go her way. She was confident, but as the trial began, she saw Sean's father step onto the bench. She instantly recognized Sean, who had a striking resemblance to the judge. Wait, this is Sean's father, Rachel thought, her stomach sinking. The reality of the situation hit her like a ton of bricks. Sean's father, a man of strong moral principles, was not someone who could be easily swayed. He was known for his integrity, and he had already heard both sides of the story. His expression was calm but resolute as he addressed the courtroom. Rachel, I have reviewed the evidence thoroughly. You have claimed that you were attacked for no reason, but your story is filled with inconsistencies. The judge began, his voice firm but not unkind. Rachel's face turned pale as Sean's father continued, breaking down her false claims one by one. The judge's voice echoed through the courtroom as he exposed the holes in Rachel's story. It is clear from the evidence that Jessica acted in defense, and your accusations of harassment are without merit. Rachel's heart pounded as she tried to maintain her composure. She had not expected things to go this way, not when she had everything stacked in her favor. Furthermore, I have learned that you have been falsifying details about Jessica's character, spreading defamatory claims that have no basis in reality. The judge continued, his tone growing even more serious. You will be held accountable for your actions. Rachel opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She was stunned. This was not how it was supposed to go. She had thought her wealth and connections would protect her, but now she was facing consequences for her lies. What do you think should happen to Rachel? Should she be let off or made to face the consequences of her actions? Share your thoughts in the comments and click on the like and subscribe button now if you have not. The courtroom was filled with a tense silence, the weight of what was about to happen hanging in the air. Rachel, sitting at the defendant's table, clenched her fists tightly, the realization of her impending defeat slowly sinking in. She had thought her wealth, her connections, would be her shield, but now she was facing the reality that the scales of justice had tipped against her. She was about to be held accountable for her actions. For the past few weeks, Rachel had been adamant that she was in the right. She had convinced herself that her wealth and status entitled her to special treatment. But now, with the judge's gavel about to fall, the truth was unavoidable. Judge Martin sat at the bench, his expression unreadable. He had listened carefully to every word spoken, every piece of evidence presented, and now, after days of deliberation, it was time for him to make his decision. Rachel, once so confident, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. The glare from her attorney was not enough to ease the sinking feeling in her stomach. Plot twist: the judge invites witnesses to the stand. The courtroom had fallen silent once again, the weight of the moment hanging in the air. After hearing the arguments from both sides, the judge, known for his careful deliberation and fair rulings, leaned forward in his chair, his voice cutting through the stillness. Before I make my final ruling, I believe it is important to hear from those who were present during this incident. Rachel's stomach tightened. She had not expected this. In her mind, the case had been simple. She was the victim and Jessica's. The behavior had been unjustifiable. But now, as the judge called for witnesses, a sense of dread crept in. She could feel the eyes of the courtroom turning toward her, some with curiosity, others with judgment. We will now hear from witnesses who were present that evening at the restaurant. Let them testify to what they saw and heard during the altercation between the defendant and the plaintiff. The judge gestured toward the door. Slowly, Sean, Kylie, Emily, and even Jessica's cousin, the owner of the restaurant, stepped forward one by one. The weight of their testimonies, each coming from a different perspective, was about to change everything. The first to speak was Sean, the tourist who had been sitting at the nearby table when Rachel and Jessica's confrontation began. He stood confidently, his gaze unwavering as he made his way to the stand. Rachel's heart raced as she watched him approach. Sean's voice, calm and measured, rang out clearly in the courtroom. I was at the restaurant that night, sitting just a few feet away from the defendant and the plaintiff. I witnessed the entire exchange. Sean's eyes briefly glanced at Rachel, and then he continued, his tone firm but respectful. I saw Rachel belittle Jessica the moment she walked up to the table. There was no reason for her to treat Jessica with such disrespect. When Jessica accidentally stepped on her dress, Rachel exploded. I saw the slap from Rachel's hand hit Jessica's face first. It was loud, aggressive, and completely unprovoked. Sean paused, letting his words sink in. Then Jessica slapped her back. I was shocked, but I understood why. Nobody deserves to be treated that way. Not in front of others, not in a public place. Jessica stood up for herself, and she had every right to do so. Rachel's face flushed with humiliation as Sean's testimony became a turning point. He had witnessed it all, and his account was clear and unwavering. Next, Kylie, the woman who had tweeted about the incident in real time, stepped up to the witness stand. Her phone had captured the moment, and now the world was about to hear what she had witnessed firsthand. Kylie was calm, but her eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen something unjust. I was sitting at a table across from the defendant and the plaintiff. I could see the tension between them, and it was clear to me that Rachel had a bad attitude from the beginning. Kylie's voice was steady, though her words cut deep. When Jessica accidentally stepped on Rachel's dress, I saw Rachel lose control. She slapped Jessica hard across the face. It wasn't called for, and it was shocking. I felt uncomfortable being there, watching it happen. Kylie glanced briefly at Rachel before continuing. I knew I had to say something, so I tweeted about it. I felt that people needed to know what was happening, and I could not just stay silent. The words stung Rachel like ice, and the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Kylie's testimony added another layer to the story, showing how the event had impacted others and highlighting Rachel's unchecked behavior. Then Emily, the mother who had been dining with her children, took the stand. She appeared calm, but there was an intensity to her gaze as she recounted what had happened that evening. I was with my 2 children at a table not far from the defendant and the plaintiff. We had just finished eating when we witnessed the entire altercation. I saw Rachel raise her voice and insult Jessica without any provocation. Emily's voice trembled slightly, but she stood firm. When Rachel slapped Jessica, I saw the shock on Jessica's face. She was not the aggressor. Rachel had already pushed her to the point where she had no choice but to stand up for herself. I looked at my children, and I could see the confusion in their eyes. They did not understand why someone would treat another person that way. I had to teach them a lesson about respect. Emily turned to face the judge. No one deserves to be disrespected like that, especially not in front of others. Jessica was forced into a position where she had to defend herself, and I am proud that she did. Finally, Jessica's cousin, the owner of the restaurant, took the stand. He had been watching the proceedings from the back, but now, as the judge called on him, it was his turn to speak. I own the restaurant where this incident occurred, and I have worked closely with Jessica for a long time. She has always shown incredible professionalism, even in the face of difficult customers. Jessica's cousin's voice was steady, and his words carried the weight of authority. When I heard about what happened that night, I was appalled. Jessica has always conducted herself with grace, and for someone to treat her the way Rachel did is unacceptable. I am proud of her for standing up for herself. She did nothing wrong. His words hung in the air, emphasizing the support Jessica had from her family and colleagues. The truth was becoming undeniable, and Rachel could not escape the reality of her actions. That as each witness shared their testimony, the weight of Rachel's actions became clearer. She felt isolated in the courtroom, the walls closing in around her. The people who had once supported her were now speaking out against her behavior. The public backlash had already begun to take a toll, and now, in this moment of reckoning, Rachel had nowhere to hide. She had come into the courtroom thinking she could control the narrative, using her wealth and privilege to silence others. But now she was facing the consequences. She was no longer the powerful woman who could get whatever she wanted. She was just a woman who had mistreated someone who did not deserve it, and the world was watching. Judge Martin steadied his gaze as he gave his judgment. After reviewing all the evidence presented in this case, I find that the defendant, Rachel, has not only falsely accused Jessica of harassment, but she has also engaged in the act of defamation. Rachel's heart dropped. The words felt like a punch to the gut. Defamation. It was the label she never thought she would wear. She was about to realize the true cost of her actions. Furthermore, it has become clear that the defendant fabricated details about Jessica's behavior and character in order to justify her own misconduct. The judge's voice was steady, resolute. This court does not tolerate such dishonesty, especially when it leads to the unjust harm of another person. Rachel's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the table. Her attempt to retaliate had not only failed, but it had backfired. Instead of restoring her pride, it had shattered it. She had been so sure she could win, so confident that her status would make everything fall in her favor. But now the law was on Jessica's side. The judge continued, "As a result, I hereby fine the defendant an additional sum for defamation of character, in addition to the settlement that will be awarded to the plaintiff, Jessica. The amount will be substantial, considering the damage done to her reputation." Rachel's face was drained of color. Her mind raced. This was not supposed to happen. The fine, which was far greater than she had ever anticipated, was a harsh blow to her sense of control. This was not just a monetary loss, it was a public defeat, one that would echo through her career. In addition, Rachel's employer, the agency she works for, has been notified of these actions. They will be made aware of the extent to which their employee has behaved dishonestly. The judge's words hung heavily in the air. "You will also face repercussions at your place of employment." Rachel's stomach twisted. The shame of knowing her agency would now see her for what she truly was. A liar, a manipulator, was too much. To bear her sense of superiority, built over years of wealth and privilege, was crumbling before her eyes. As the judge's final words echoed through the courtroom, Rachel felt a deep hollow sensation in the pit of her stomach. The courtroom, once buzzing with whispers and anticipation, now held a heavy silence. Her lawyer's attempts to argue in her defense had been futile, and all she could do was sit there facing the cold reality of her actions. Rachel glanced at the crowd, the same crowd that had witnessed her humiliation at the restaurant. Some of them, the ones who had seen her belittle Jessica, now looked at her with a mix of judgment and pity. The judge's ruling was not just a legal victory for Jessica, it was a personal defeat for Rachel. She had been forced to confront the truth, something she had avoided her entire life. She was not above the law, and her money could not shield her from the consequences of her actions. Her body felt heavy as she stood up, the weight of her disgrace pressing down on her shoulders. The whispers of the courtroom seemed to follow her as she walked out, her head held low in defeat. Her pride, once unshakable, was now shattered, and Rachel knew there was no escaping the consequences. As the courtroom continued to buzz with murmurs, Jessica sat quietly, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The moment the judge had pronounced his ruling, a wave of relief washed over her. She had stood up for herself, and now justice had been served. But it was not just about the ruling, it was about the support she had received along the way. Throughout the trial, Jessica had been nervous. She had faced Rachel's accusations with strength, but it had not been easy. Yet the moment the judge ruled in her favor, the tide had turned. It was not just about the money or the fine, it was about the message sent. You cannot treat people like that, and there will be consequences. But Jessica was not alone in this. The support she had received from the people around her, from Sean who had spoken up for her, to the community that had rallied behind her, had made all the difference. She realized that sometimes, in moments of struggle, it was not just about the individual, it was about the collective voice that rose in unison against injustice. Rachel sat in stunned silence, her face pale and her posture rigid. She had come into the courtroom with confidence, certain that her wealth and influence would protect her. But now, with the judge's words echoing in her ears, she felt the weight of her actions pressing down on her. The fine was not just a financial burden, it was a public acknowledgement of her wrongdoing. Her reputation, carefully cultivated over the years, now lay in ruins. The murmurs of the courtroom grew louder as people began to file out. Reporters scribbled notes, capturing every detail of the dramatic trial. Cameras flashed, capturing Jessica's composed face and Rachel's defeated expression. It was a story that would spread far beyond the walls of the courthouse, a reminder that justice could prevail even against those who believed themselves untouchable. Outside the courthouse, Jessica was met with a crowd of supporters. People cheered, clapped, and offered words of encouragement. Sean stood by her side, his presence a steady reminder of the courage it took to speak up. "You did it, Jessica," he said with a smile. "You showed her that she could not break you." Jessica nodded, her eyes glistening with tears of relief. "It was not just my fight," she said softly. "It was for everyone who has ever been treated unfairly." Sean placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "And you gave them hope." The crowd continued to gather, some holding signs of support, others simply wanting to be part of the moment. For Jessica, it was overwhelming but heartwarming. She realized that her story had resonated with so many because it was not just about her. It was about standing up to injustice wherever it appeared. Rachel, on the other hand, slipped quietly out of the courthouse, her head bowed low. The whispers followed her, the judgment of the public heavy on her shoulders. She had lost. More than the case, she had lost her dignity. As Jessica looked around at the faces of those who had supported her, she knew this was a turning point in her life. She had faced adversity, stood tall, and emerged stronger. The trial had been a test, but it had also been a lesson, a reminder that standing up for oneself was not just an act of defiance, it was an act of empowerment. Days turned into weeks, and Jessica's story continued to spread. News outlets picked it up, social media buzzed with discussions, and people from all walks of life reached out to her. Messages poured in, some sharing their own experiences of standing up to injustice, others simply offering words of encouragement. Jessica took it all in with humility, knowing that her journey had become bigger than her own. She was now a symbol of resilience and courage. One evening, as she sat at home reading through the messages, she came across one that stood out. It was from a young woman who wrote, "Thank you for sharing your story. I was afraid to stand up for myself, but seeing what you did has given me the strength to do the same." Jessica's eyes welled up with tears as she read the heartfelt message. She realized then that her actions had created a ripple effect. It was not just about her own empowerment, it was about inspiring others to find their voice. Sean remained a constant presence in her life, offering support and encouragement. The bond they had formed during the trial had grown stronger, built on a foundation of mutual respect and admiration. Together they attended events, spoke at community gatherings, and shared Jessica's story as a source of inspiration. At one such event, Jessica stood before a crowd of eager listeners. She spoke about her journey, the challenges she had faced, and the importance of standing up for oneself. Her words resonated deeply, drawing nods and applause from the audience. One woman in the crowd raised her hand and asked, "How did you find the courage to stand up to someone like Rachel?" Jessica paused for a moment before answering. "Courage is not the absence of fear," she said. "It is the decision to stand up even when you are afraid. I was scared, but I knew that if I stayed silent, nothing would change." The room erupted in applause, the audience moved by her honesty and strength. Jessica continued to share her story, each time reaching more people, each time spreading the message that respect and dignity were rights, not privileges. Rachel, meanwhile, struggled to rebuild her life. The court ruling had left her financially strained and her reputation was in tatters. She found herself isolated, her former friends distancing themselves from the scandal that had engulfed her. The life of privilege she had once enjoyed now felt like a distant memory. She tried to move on, but the shadow of her actions loomed large. Every time she walked into a room, she felt the weight of judgmental stares. Every conversation seemed to carry an undercurrent of pity or disdain. It was a humbling experience, one that forced her to confront the reality of her behavior. As Jessica's star rose, Rachel's fell. The contrast was stark, a testament to the consequences of one's actions. Jessica had chosen courage and integrity, and it had lifted her up. Rachel had chosen arrogance and cruelty, and it had brought her down. Months later, Jessica found herself standing at the steps of a university. Her savings, along with the support she had received, had made it possible for her to finally pursue her dream of higher education. As she looked around at the bustling campus, she felt a sense of pride and accomplishment. She had come a long way from the young waitress who had once been humiliated in front of a crowded restaurant. She was now a woman who had faced adversity head-on and emerged stronger. On her first day of classes, Jessica received a message from Sean. "Good luck today. I know you are going to do amazing things." She smiled, his words a comforting reminder of the support she had always had. Their friendship had blossomed into something deeper, a connection that went beyond the trial and the events that had brought them together. As Jessica settled into her new life, she never forgot the lessons she had learned. She knew that challenges would continue to come her way, but she also knew that she had the strength to face them. Her journey had taught her that dignity and respect were not just ideals to strive for, but fundamental rights that everyone deserved. Meanwhile, Rachel continued to grapple with the consequences of her actions. The fine she had been ordered to pay had left her financially burdened, and her attempts to rebuild her reputation were met with skepticism. She found herself working tirelessly to regain even a fraction of the respect she had once taken for granted. But no matter how hard she tried, the shadow of her past loomed large. People remembered what she had done, and forgiveness was not easily given. Rachel's downfall served as a stark reminder that arrogance and cruelty carried heavy consequences. Jessica's story, on the other hand, became a beacon of hope. She was invited to speak at schools, community centers, and conferences, sharing her journey and encouraging others to stand up for themselves. Each time she spoke, she saw the impact her words had on others, the way their eyes lit up with newfound determination. One evening, after giving a particularly moving speech at a local community center, Jessica was approached by a young man. He looked nervous as he spoke. "I just wanted to say thank you. I have been dealing with someone who treats me badly, and I was scared to speak up, but hearing your story has given me the courage to finally stand up for myself." Jessica smiled warmly, her heart swelling with pride. "That is why I share my story," she said gently, "so that others can find their own strength." The young man nodded, gratitude shining in his eyes. Jessica walked away that evening with a renewed sense of purpose. She realized that her journey was not just about her own growth, but about empowering others to find their voice. As time passed, Jessica's life continued to flourish. She excelled in her studies, built lasting friendships, and deepened her bond with Sean. Together, they envisioned a future filled with purpose and shared values. Jessica knew that the road ahead would not always be easy, but she was confident in her ability to navigate whatever challenges came her way. Her journey had shown her the power of resilience, the importance of standing up for oneself, and the impact that one person's courage could have on others. Rachel, on the other hand, remained a cautionary tale. Her fall from grace was a reminder of how quickly arrogance and cruelty could unravel a life. She had once believed herself untouchable, but her actions had proven otherwise. She had lost more than money and reputation. She had lost the respect of those around her. In quiet moments, Rachel reflected on her choices, the weight of regret heavy on her shoulders. She realized too late that kindness and humility could have preserved the life she had once cherished, but the damage was done, and the path to redemption was long and uncertain. Jessica's story, however, was one of hope and triumph. She had faced injustice and emerged stronger, not just for herself but for others who looked to her as an example. Her legacy was not just in the courtroom victory, but in the lives she had touched, the people she had inspired, and the message she had spread. As she stood on the threshold of her future, Jessica knew that her journey was far from over. It was only the beginning. With courage in her heart and determination in her soul, she stepped forward, ready to embrace whatever came next. The echoes of her past served as a reminder of how far she had come, and the promise of her future shone brightly ahead.